Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So on this channel, we talk about the worst case scenarios because overreacting is always better than underreacting. That old saying that we hope for the best and we plan for the worst. That is the mantra of the prepper. In today's video, I am going to tell you some things that are probably going to scare a lot of people. But I think it's important that you hear them, because if you don't, you may be making decisions right now which are not going to be conducive to the future that's coming. Let's talk about what the government has told us so far and all the blunders they've made really quickly here before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video. First, the Canadian government brushed off the calls to stop flights from China and close the borders to various countries which were high risk. They brushed that off, but with the swiftness with which they brushed that off, they imposed nationwide lockdowns, essentially, on all the major cities and states of emergency.
I understand that there's some voices that would say that we should shut down the border to China, but I would say that Canada is following expert advice from the World Health Organization and working closely with allied partners like France and the UK and Germany, who have decided to take a different approach than the approach that the Australians and Americans have taken. France and the UK and Germany.
Enough is enough. Go home and stay home. This is what we all need to be doing. And we're going to make sure this happens, whether by educating people more on the risks or by enforcing the rules, if that's needed.
So that was the first blunder that they made. Second blunder was in the United States, when the U.S. government said that, there are probably only going to be a couple cases by next week, so let's not worry about this.
We have it so well under control. We're testing everybody that we need to test, and we're finding very little problem. 15 people out of billions of people.
Yeah.
15 people.
Yeah.
They're getting better, and soon they're all going to be better. It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
And all of a sudden, there's now 250,000 reported cases. That means that that's how many cases have been reported. That's not the actual amount that's out there right now. Because remember, reported always lags actual, and they have numbers to prove that the actual amount of cases is typically around 40% higher, minimum, than the reported cases. So right now, you can wager that there's probably between 450 and 500,000 cases minimum in the United States. 500,000 cases from just a little over a month ago, when they were saying, there may be a case here or there, but it's not going to be a big deal. They said, don't wear masks because masks don't work. We need to save those masks for healthcare providers. They did a whole video why I think that argument is BS, because like I said, in times of crisis, even without being mandated to do so, most suppliers are going to save their inventory for hospitals, for government agencies. That's why we, as dealers and distributors, were basically cut off in February from bringing any of that stuff into our stores. Now, they've changed their tune. They've done a complete 180, and they said, you know what, maybe the public should be wearing masks, both the CDC and the Surgeon General. You should wear masks. And not only that, to provide even more misinformation, they're saying that you should use anything you possibly can as a mask, without the warning that you could potentially be bringing a contaminated garment or rag or whatever it is you're using. Let's say you're wearing a bandana. If you bring that bandana into your home after a day of walking around or doing your business, and there's viral particles on that, there's a reason why masks are disposable. Okay, I know this for a lot of preppers out there, this is common sense. But those masks are disposable because you're supposed to throw them away. And that's why a lot of frontline workers were getting sick, because they were reusing their stuff. Now, it's better than nothing if you're going to throw it away, or if you have a system by which you can disinfect it with some kind of bleach or ultraviolet light, things we've talked about on this channel before. But if you don't do that, then you actually run the risk of making the problem worse, because you may have collected a significant amount of viral load on the exterior of that garment that you're using as a face mask, which I should add, doesn't filter down far enough to protect against any aerosolized component of this virus. If it is, some speculate it is. There's always mixed opinions about that, but I'm not going to get into that. But if it is, it doesn't filter down like a virus filter does, where it's down to like 0.1 microns type thing. Now, the misinformation and the misdirection is not going to end there. I want you to understand that this is just the beginning, because remember, their aim, or at least it should be a utilitarian one to try to maximize the amount of good for the most amount of people. Sometimes that means imposing draconian measures. Sometimes that might even mean lying to your population. It's just what it is. I'm not saying it's the best strategy to take, but that's what they're tasked with doing sometimes. Sometimes it's better that we don't know certain things that are going on. Something that not everybody's able to understand. Anyways, let me get to the point here. So the point of what I'm trying to say is the Government Operations Center of Canada, which is kind of like our FEMA, has said that this lockdown is going to go until July. Now, what are they telling you in the United States? They're saying that it's only going to go till the end of April. In Canada, they've guaranteed some citizens who may have lost their jobs a couple $1,000s a month to pay the bills. Okay, and they're probably not going to have jobs to go back to when this is all said and done, because most small businesses aren't going to be able to weather 4 months with no work and paying their leases. And I'm not sure how that's going to work. Maybe they're going to find a way to freeze all of that. But of course, the bigger players are going to get bailed out. A couple weeks ago, the US government said that everybody's going to get back to work by April 12th. Now they've bumped the goalpost back. It's April 30th. They're going to keep bumping it back and bumping it back and bumping it back. You know why? Because there's 500,000 people who have this disease. Think about this. If we take China's word that they've got it under control, they had 80,000 cases. What did it take for them to get that under control? It took them welding people into their homes, putting them into hospitals that look like prisons with bars on the windows, hauling people off, kicking and screaming against their will to these quarantine centers. That's what it took to bring it under control at 80,000. You have 500,000, and that's just what we know about. And remember, I based that on that reported actual distinction. 500,000 people, that's just what we know about out there, and this is doubling at a rate of every week or so. Now, there is a bit of a backlog in the cases due to test results coming in and stuff like that, but the reality is 500,000 people, when you got some cities that aren't even on lockdown, this ain't stopping at the end of April, guys. You need to realize that this is going to go through summer. The economy is going to crash and burn. They will flatten the curve in some places, but you need to understand what flattening the curve is. Flattening the curve doesn't just mean like, okay, we flatten the curve, we're done. All flattening the curve means is stopping exponential growth. It means lowering the amount of cases today than what we had yesterday. After you've plateaued the curve, there's still many weeks of containment measures to go until you eradicate it altogether. And to eradicate it altogether is going to be a monumental feat that unfortunately I don't foresee happening in the United States. This is going to burn through the better part of the population. I don't believe this number, 200,000, 100,000. I think that that's just another goalpost that's going to get moved, to be honest. Because we're having almost 1,000 deaths in the United States a day already. And that number is projected to keep increasing as well. So soon it will be 2,000 a day, 3,000 a day. Well, you're only 30 days, if at 3,000 a day, to 100,000 cases. And that's if it stays at that. It could go to 5,000 a day, 10,000 a day. I'm not saying this to be overly sensational. This is just math. Remember, what their job is to keep you calm. If they came out today and said 1 million people are going to die, you know how many people would be losing their shit and not abiding by these pseudo lockdowns that they're imposing? So New York is only the start. The buck keeps getting passed. You'll notice that from China, then to Iran, then to Italy, then to Spain, then to France, then to New York. Who's next? Who knows? Probably New Orleans or Detroit, or who knows where it's going to be. Japan, Tokyo, they're saying now. I'm sure some of the southern hemispheric countries are going to start to feel it pretty soon too, as they move into winter time. So what we're going to see is an economic implosion like we've never before seen. The Great Depression unemployment rate, I believe it was 22%. We're looking at right now in the United States, the real unemployment rate. This is according to the New York Times, so I don't know how accurate it is. They say it's around 13%. That includes people who've dropped out of the workforce and are no longer looking for work. So it seems pretty reasonable, 13%. That's what we're at right now. Can you imagine how many small businesses who are deemed non-essential, or even if they are still allowed to operate, they're not going to have any foot traffic, so they're going to go out of business anyways. Could you imagine how many people are going to be unemployed? Now, it's unfair, really, because Amazon's an essential service, supposedly. We can see what they're doing with their workers around the world. But all these smaller businesses can't function. I'm going to be doing a video that's going to go into depth about, maybe not so much depth, but it's going to talk about all the big changes that are going to come after this event. Now, there's another idea I want to share with you guys. You know, I try to be fairly empirical on this channel. I don't like to promulgate nutty theories because there's a lot of those going around that I can't stand. I get emails all the time about these crazy theories. I'm not even going to talk about them. But sometimes you have to infer the future. And one of the reasons why I lost faith in the Canadian government and our health officials is because one health official, when asked today, he was asked, you know, why did you lock it down sooner when, you know, we could have potentially stopped this thing in its tracks? And he said, well, the data at the time wasn't saying that. And then the guy asked him, well, didn't you have an intuition that maybe this was going to be worse? And what is the threshold for relying on that intuition and making a decision based on that? And he said, stone-faced, no, we just follow the data. So now they're asking us to follow the data again with these projections that between 3,000 and 15,000 people in Toronto may die. Okay, that's what the data is saying. You have to ask the question, how useful is the data if it couldn't predict what most people were saying at that time? I understand a broken clock is right twice a day, and you know, anybody can just say, yeah, the end is nigh, the end is nigh, the end is nigh, and eventually you're going to be right, fortunately. But this was pretty obvious to a lot of people, even a lot of, you know, intellectual people who, you know, they didn't necessarily have all the concrete evidence to show how that was going to be the case. But regardless, they're overreacting now, so why wouldn't they overreact then? Anyways, so I have a theory for you that I want to float. Do you think that there are groups out there who may be weaponizing this? And I don't mean the whole theory about, oh, was it started in the lab and all of that. I'm not talking about that. Going down that rabbit hole is going to prove fruitless in the end. You're going to end up wasting a lot of your time, and you're going to have nothing to show for it in the end. Trust me, I've went down those conspiracy rabbit holes in the past, and it's just an endless waste of time. You're better off going and getting an extra job and putting your money in the bank and, you know, saving it for a rainy day. But here we go. Do you think that there are certain groups out there who only have at their disposal certain asymmetrical tactics, that one of the best 4D new generation warfare tactics might be the biological one? And might they, knowing that this is already spreading, might they kick up the dirt, spread the love around a bit, if you know what I mean? My question is, how is it that the US now has 250,000 cases? That is baffling to me, because Trump was the first guy to lock down the border with China. Now, I know it probably had spread far and wide from there, and probably came in from somewhere else. But I've long since suspected that there is a greater geopolitical, socioeconomic context to everything that is going on right now. I just can't quite put my finger on what it is. I haven't been able to articulate it yet. I haven't taken in enough information to put it into words. But there's something else going on with this. I don't know what, and I don't know if even you going and investigating it is worth your time. I think what you need to do right now is get ready, because this lockdown is going to last for many months. That said, think about this. Pandemic, economic collapse, war. How did we pull out of the last depression? Well, World War II came around. The war machine started up. After that, it was a time of wild prosperity. The 50s were like, the roaring 20s all over again. What did Trump say yesterday? Well, we got to fight the drug war. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. We got supply shortages everywhere. Our military is becoming stricken with all these viruses. So let's, double down on the drug cartels, because we don't want them to take advantage of us while we're tying our shoelaces, getting laced up to fight this pandemic. Now, okay, you can see how that might be a reasonable argument, but we all know the rift between Venezuela and the United States. So is there something starting there? And why the United States may get hit doubly so, even though there have been some improvements made with this recently, is the oil spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia. What is that all about? Well, they say it's because the Chinese were turning away oil tankers, and that caused a increased supply of oil. Thus, the demand was significantly reduced. Thus, the price went down. And Russia lowered its price, and Saudi Arabia fired back and back and forth and back and forth. And Russia is probably one of the few countries right now, unless they get stricken with COVID as well, which they probably will, who can really ride out an oil price war. Because the United States shale industry, the Canadian tar sand industry, there's no margin to be had when gas prices are this low. They simply will fold and go out of business. They'll shut them down, and they're not going to start up again for many years if this oil price war continues. Now, the good news for Saudi Arabia is that they squeeze out some of their competition, but I really don't think that the Saudis are trying to do that, because of course they buy fighter jets from the Americans, so I highly doubt that they want to lose that ally. It seems more likely that maybe the Russians are forcing the Saudis into that, knowing that the Saudis' economy is like 80% oil, so their economy is going to collapse if they don't, get the oil price back up again. But at the same time, they still need to sell their oil. So it seems like maybe Russia is up to something. I don't know. I'm not fully up to speed on that. What I'm saying is that this is going to have very, very big implications that go well beyond the pandemic itself. I was just reading an article sent to me by an acquaintance of mine that indicated that the CBC is now talking about food shortages. Mainstream Canada talking about food shortages, which are in part due to the fact that workers who come to both Canada and the United States cannot be brought in to help with the harvesting of crops and all of that stuff. So there's definitely going to be a bottleneck there, a bullwhip effect due to, all this pent-up demand and the lack of supply because of the collapsed supply chains. But what you need to understand right now is that if they're saying the end of April, don't even think about the end of April. You need to start making a plan on how you are going to adapt to a post-COVID economy. And don't expect any of these happy-go-lucky, trendy YouTubers to tell you this stuff. They're not going to tell you this stuff. They're going to sit there and they're going to regurgitate whatever the so-called official source is. Okay, and I respect those sources with their credentials, and I take from them what I will, but you also need to understand the crowd control component. That doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true. In a sense, they're giving you maybe the best case scenario, but we can't rely on that. We need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. The last thing I'm going to suggest is don't get too physically complacent while you're in quarantine or lockdown or containment, whatever you want to call it, because there may come a point where you need to move. You know, this new world that we're entering is going to require maybe a bit more physical fitness. Go out, go for jogs, go for walks, go for runs, go for bike rides, do some calisthenics in the park. Health is everything, especially in a pandemic. Health is number one. Keep your immunity up. Try to eat as good as you can. Make sure you're topping off your vitamins, supplementing with vitamins. Try to stay positive. You know, it might seem, if you just watch my channel, that I'm always dwelling on the negative, but I usually save all of my negative, my pessimism for these videos, because that's what preparedness is about. You're not a prepper if you think everything is going to go well. Even if you think everything is going to go average, you're a prepper because you're concerned about things going badly. That's what emergency preparedness is all about. They don't teach paramedics to just smile all the time and hope for the best. No, they teach you how to save people's lives, how to do CPR and, you know, give people oxygen and all that stuff. But at the same time, I have a lot of fun too. I try to joke around, I try to live, I try to laugh. Just because of this nonsense doesn't mean life has to end. And a lot of the best things in life, I truly do believe, are free. So take care, guys. Stay safe. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.